Alright, if we're going to talk about energy and metabolism, we need to discuss Gibbs free energy. And we're not going to go into this in great detail, but we do need to talk about the basic concept of free energy, energy that can do work in a system. And when we measure Gibbs free energy, we're generally going to talk about that when temperature and pressure are uniform, as in a living cell. So the conditions are going to be pretty much the same because the conditions matter. So if we define change in free energy as delta G, we can see that the change in enthalpy, so I'm going to say that as enthalpy, which is not the correct way to say it, but I want to say it as enthalpy to make sure you contrast it with entropy. So enthalpy and entropy sound too much alike. So enthalpy is going to be the change in heat energy, basically, think about it that way, and then the change in entropy is delta S. And that's going to be temperature dependent then. So we can relate these variables in the equation that you see here, delta G equals delta H minus T times delta S. Now, what you want to take home from this is the idea that you're looking for a negative delta G, because negative delta G means that the reaction is spontaneous. If this reaction is spontaneous, we can harvest energy from it. All right, and that's the key to life, because we're very interested in harvesting energy so we can keep maintaining ourselves and be alive. So these are some points that we really want to get in our head. The idea is that free energy is just a measurement. Gibbs free energy is a measurement of the system's instability, its tendency to change to a more stable state. Ultimately, that's going to be the amount of energy that I can actually get out of it to do something. So during that spontaneous change, free energy decreases and the stability of the system increases. Equilibrium is maximum stability, and a process is spontaneous. It can perform work only when it's moving towards equilibrium, right? So you can have a diver on top of the pool, but you can't do anything with that diver until you push him overboard. Now, when you push him overboard, now you can potentially harvest energy from that. Or look at diffusion. So if you have a concentration gradient, you can basically use that to harvest the energy of that gradient dissipating, moving from a high concentration to a low concentration, to equilibrium. Chemical reaction. Potential energy can be stored in a molecule that then, when you release it or catalyze its release, you can harvest that energy to do something else. All right? So all of these, their starting points would have a negative delta G. Right? So the free energy of the system decreases as you go through the process. That's what we're looking for. Right? So we want to, again, to repeat that, we want to talk about moving towards equilibrium, right? Moving towards equilibrium. Now, there are two main factors that we want to consider. Free energy difference between the products and the reactants under standard conditions, right? And the concentration of those products and reactants. Okay, that ultimately can dictate where things come to rest when they come to equilibrium. But really, the energy difference between the two is easier to understand. And when we start with high energy reactants and move to low energy products, we have what's called an exergonic reaction, and we can get energy out of that. When we have low energy reactants and have to put energy into them to make the product, we have an endergonic reaction. So these are the two types of reactions that we're going to associate with metabolism in general, that we're going to associate with Gibbs free energy. Now, those of you who have taken enough chemistry, what I don't want you to do is confuse these with an exothermic and an endothermic reaction. So those are different. That's about the heat movement in the system. But remember, Gibbs free energy has a heat component, which can be positive or negative, and still be exergonic or endergonic. So basically, if you're exergonic, you're going to release energy moving from the products to the reactants. If you're endergonic, you're going to have to absorb, or energy has to be put into the reaction for it to move forward. It is non-spontaneous if it's an endergonic reaction. So if we graph this, again, we can see the progress of the reaction. Reactants, the free energy is negative, boom, release energy. Here, a non-spontaneous reaction, we have to put energy into the system. You know, DNA does not spontaneously assemble. Proteins do not spontaneously assemble, but these are essential reactions that are going to occur in life. So we have to have a system that's built where we're going to couple exergonic and endergonic reactions to keep things moving forward. Okay? So we're going to talk about that in great detail as we study photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So, equilibrium and metabolism. So remember, reactions in a closed system will eventually reach equilibrium, and then they're dead. But we, life, are not a closed system. And again, traditionally, if you talk to the physicists and talk about thermodynamics, they're talking about a closed system thermodynamic studies, right? So what you want is non-equilibrium thermodynamics, okay, or net thermodynamics. So cells are not at equilibrium. If they are, they're dead. Okay, so what we want to look at here is this example, kind of water running from one higher container to the other. As it moves from a region of higher energy to a state of lower energy, we can use that movement towards equilibrium to drive a hydroelectric system and light a light bulb. But when it reaches equilibrium, we're done. That's it. That's dead. You have to think about life as an open system. You constantly have to be putting water, in this case, into one end and draining water out the other to maintain the movement, the flow of energy through the system. And in reality, the more of these little reservoirs you can link together, the more akin it is to life, because we have many, 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 many tiny steps to harness as much energy as we can as things move from high energy to low energy. And that's what we're going to study as we move forward.